Okay, so as I was sitting down and planning out all of my end of the year wrap up videos, I decided to do one on the best palettes of 2024. I don't think I did one last year. I'm pretty sure I tried under 5 new palettes. I know there were 3 high-end palettes and then maybe a couple of drugstore palettes as well. This year I tried a few more. Still not a lot compared to what I used to do. There was a video back in the day where I reviewed like over 50 palettes as my end of the year video. And at this point in my life, I just don't have the desire to try that many palettes every single year. And I know everyone keeps saying eyeshadow is dead, people aren't into palettes anymore, but there were still some really good launches in 2024, some amazing formulas, some really beautiful color stories. So I thought I would do like an end of the year video and share my top favorites with you at all price points, drugstore and high end. Let me start with the 2 holiday palettes I purchased this year. They're both limited edition, but I'm pretty sure they're both still available. If I can find them, I'll link them in the description box below. So this first one I purchased during the Sephora holiday savings event. I was kind of going back and forth between a couple of different palettes, and then this was like a last minute launch. I immediately knocked the other 2 out of my cart and added this one, and I'm so glad I went with this one. It's Huda Beauty's Icy Nude. This is such a gorgeous palette. It's kind of hard to see because it is very reflective, but I'll do a close-up shot for you and I'll swatch everything. I absolutely love this palette. I think I've gotten a lot more use out of it than I originally thought I would. I mean, I knew I was going to end up loving it, but I was like, I'll create a couple of like really pretty wintry icy looks, but there are some pretty shades in here that pull very pink on the eyes, which I did not expect. So not only can you get like a true silvery icy white look, you can also get like a very pink toned look, a brown smoky eye, something a little bit warmer with gold all over the lid. There are a lot of different shades in here that you can use together to create very cohesive looks, but also very opposite looks. Like obviously one side of the palette is very silvery, very cool toned. The other side has some darker smoky shades, but I really think this gold in here and then these pinker tones, and this shade looks pretty pink on the eyes too, does add a lot of versatility to the palette. And I just think every single time I use it, it creates the most beautiful, sparkly, wintry eye look. I really don't know that I have a lot of these colors in my collection. I have a pretty extensive collection. I am doing an eyeshadow palette declutter, which should be up soon, but I don't have a ton of like silvery gray tones. So I do think this kind of filled a spot in my collection where I was missing shades like this, and it pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit because even though I love neutrals and I love a good cool tone smoky look, I don't typically incorporate a lot of silvers, a lot of these like icy metallics. So it has been so much fun. If you can get your hands on this and you do like Huda Beauty's formulas and the fact that she does a lot of different textures in her palettes, I do think it's worth the money. I'm pretty sure she said this is the last large palette she's going to do, so I'm curious to see what the brand has in store for 2025. I like a smaller palette, especially these days. I don't need such a large palette in my collection, but I think because she has a larger palette, she tends to do a lot of fun textures, and I hope that continues as they do end up launching smaller palettes in the future. The other holiday palette I purchased that I love and I use nonstop is this one from Urban Decay. I probably use this one a little bit more. It is the Moondust Space Cowboy Quad. So it comes with 4 beautiful shadows. This was a Sephora exclusive palette, and I think they continuously restock it. Now that we're nearing the end of the year, I don't know if that will still be the case, but if you can get your hands on it, it's a great value. The Moondust shadows are $24 each, and this comes with 4 Moondust shadows. They're slightly smaller than a single shadow, but only by a little bit, and this entire palette, I believe, was $39. I definitely end up using the lightest shade and then the brown tone shade the most. The pinks are gorgeous, but I think they tend to be more so what I would consider like a spring or summertime shadow, and obviously that comes down to personal preference, but these are so smooth, so glittery, really beautiful on the eyes, and I was just excited to get my hands on this so I could expand my Moondust shadow collection without committing to the full-sized $24 shadows. I definitely used the lightest shade the most. It ends up looking pretty similar to Space Cowboy on the eyes, and then I also love the brown in here. I feel like that is the perfect kind of like subtle smoky eye. It's very light, so I guess I don't know that I would call it like a true smoky eye, but I love blending like a bronzer in the crease and then that all over the lid, and that looks amazing. There's a gorgeous pink in here, one that's a little bit more sparkly, but in the end, they all look gorgeous on the eyes. and this was such a great value. I'm really glad I ended up picking it up because I love the Moondust eyeshadow formula, but for me, it's a little bit harder to justify spending $24 on one. Although they were on sale for Black Friday for 12, which was a great deal. I don't know that I've seen them discounted that low in a long time. Natasha Denona did launch quite a few palettes in 2024. I almost purchased Roxa, but I ended up kicking that one out of my cart for the Huda Beauty Icy Nude, and they're obviously very different, but when I watched a couple of reviews on the Roxa palette, a lot of people were saying it pulled more pink toned on the eyes than purple, and I love a good pink eyeshadow look, but in the end, I was like, do I really need that one? I have other Natasha Denona palettes that have pinks and purples in them, so I decided to skip over that one, and the two palettes I purchased are very neutral overall. So I have the Natasha Denona Golden palette. That's what I have on my eyes today. I never had the original gold palette, which did have a lot of similar shades. I think some identical shades in it, and then like a few pops of blue. This one is obviously very neutral toned with a ton of gold shadows. I honestly can't remember which shades I have all over my eyes. I have this one, I think as a transition, this one in the crease, and then I think I have a mix of this shade, and this shade all over the lid. But to be honest with you, something I've noticed about this palette the more that I've had it is that a lot of my looks end up looking pretty similar on the eyes. There is a deeper brown in here to create some depth, and some of the golds are different. Like this is a very, very yellow gold shade, but a lot of them end up looking pretty close. And because I go in and I kind of mix colors and layer colors, in the end, I usually end up getting a look pretty similar to what I have on today. That might be a potential con for you. If you're looking for a lot of variety, a lot of versatility within a palette, this is not going to be the palette for you. I think it is a stunning palette, and these golds look amazing on the eyes. If you love gold eyeshadow, trust me, you'll really enjoy having this in your collection. But I do think, there are only so many looks you can create within this palette. It's really fun to use alongside of other palettes like Bronze, I Need a Warm, really any palette from Natasha Denona, to be honest with you. You can even use it alongside of cooler toned palettes too, but I do think the quality is really gorgeous. This has mainly metallics and shimmer shadows, and that really is her standout formula to me, but the matte shadows really do melt onto the eyes in such a gorgeous way. So I'm glad that I bought this one. Is it the most interesting? Is it the most unique? Definitely not, but it is something that I get a ton of use out of, especially now that it's the holiday season. I feel like I've been reaching for it even more. So last year, Natasha Denona did I Need a Nude. That is my favorite palette of all time. It's so gorgeous. I love using it. I use it at least every single week, and I think the shadows are amazing. You can create some beautiful looks. So because she launched that one last year and I loved it so much, when she launched I Need a Warm, it wasn't like an impulse purchase for me, but it was kind of like, yeah, obviously I'm going to buy that because I love I Need a Nude so much, and this is the warm toned version of it. I will say I don't like this one as much as I Need a Nude, and it is, again, similar to Golden in the way that most of the time, a lot of my looks end up looking pretty similar when I use this palette. I think there's a little bit more versatility within this palette compared to the Golden palette, but for the most part, you get like a mid-toned, warm, kind of coppery, bronzy eyeshadow look. I think if she launched this before Bronze, I probably would have purchased this and maybe skipped over Bronze. Bronze was my favorite palette for many, many years, especially when I loved more of like a saturated, intense eyeshadow look. This is like the less intense version of Bronze, and I feel like these days, that's the type of look I tend to prefer more so than the looks I preferred a few years ago. But I will say this palette and Bronze together are so much fun. Same with Golden. Like those three palettes, if you want to pull all of them out, you can create some really fun, interesting looks. I will say the quality with this palette is not as consistent as Golden. A few of these brown shadows will end up looking a little bit patchy on me if I'm not taking my time to really blend them out. No issue with the metallics or the shimmers. Those look amazing on the eyes, and I do really love having this in my collection. But I will say out of the two, I think I actually prefer Golden. I kind of went back and forth for a little while as to which one I prefer, but Golden performs flawlessly every single time, and I feel like I can get very similar looks, and I almost just like the way the golds look on my eyes better than these tones. If you have a lot of warm tones in your collection, I don't think you need to run out and buy this one by any means, especially because the quality isn't as consistent as some of her other palettes, but I do think it is a beautiful palette. I've enjoyed having it in my collection. As much as I love the palettes I just shared with you, you guys know that I love drugstore makeup. You really don't have to spend $70 on a palette to get a really beautiful color story or a high quality formula. I have some drugstore palettes that really impressed me this year. So one of my favorite palettes that I tried this year, I think I tried this during the summer, it was from LA Girl. It's their Sunset Daze eyeshadow palette. They launched two different color stories. This one specifically is in Summer Nights. The other one they have is like a little bit more fully neutral, whereas this one has like two pops of blue, a really beautiful intense gold, but it is a very warm toned eyeshadow palette. So I feel like it's a good alternative to the Natasha Denona I Need a Warm palette. If you don't want something so expensive, this is $10. Just because it's $10 does not mean the quality isn't there. It's a beautiful palette. This is definitely more of a buildable formula. Natasha Denona's formula is very rich, super pigmented, and I do love that when I want more of an intense look, but there are days where I want something just a little bit softer. And if you're someone who likes to start off softer and then slowly build your look up, this is a great palette, a great option. I remember when I bought this, I said at this point, like a lot of us probably do have palettes that have very similar colors in them, but if you are someone who is looking for a warm toned palette, this is a great option because the matte shadows blend out so easily. They're very silky, very smooth on the eyes. And then these shimmers are so intense. Like they have that wet looking shine to them, but you can just swipe them on with your finger. They're very, very easy to work with. So this was definitely one of my most used palettes of the year. And again, I love that it's so affordable. These Revolution Beauty palettes have gotten a little bit of attention, especially this one right here. This is the True Icon palette. It is obviously meant to be a dupe to a Patrick Ta palette. And I do love the Patrick Ta palette so much, but I have to say this comes extremely close. And if you do not have the budget to spend $70 on a palette or you just don't want to, this is a great alternative for $12. I almost think this one performs a little bit better than the Patrick Ta palette, but to be fair, I've had my Patrick Ta palette for a few years, so it could be that some of the shades are a little bit dried out. It's just getting a little bit older. The metallics in here they're like flaky in a good way. Like you can really add them to the eyes and get a super intense shine and they look amazing. Again, this is more of a buildable formula. And I just feel like in general, the drugstore does have more buildable formulas than high-end brands. And some people kind of hear the word buildable and they're like, that means lesser quality. But I just think there's a time and a place for a buildable formula and a time and a place for a super intense, rich formula. These days, I do love a little bit of a softer look, but sometimes I want more drama. So I like a buildable formula because if I don't know what I want to do, I can start off soft and get more dramatic if I want to. I did a video where I shared some dupes and alternatives for high-end products, and I did like side-by-side looks. And a lot of you were like, I can't even see a difference between that and Patrick Ta. So again, if you want a less expensive option or you just love this color story, the quality is gorgeous. They launched 4 different palettes. I love this one. And then my other favorite is probably this one, the Eternal Icon palette. Again, I did do a video using this palette. I just like the color story of this one. I think it looks pretty similar to Huda Beauty's Naughty Nude palette, but there are a couple of differences. And then I said that in a video and someone left a comment saying, oh, what was it? Someone left a comment saying it looked like another palette. Let me see if I can find it. They said it looked like Huda's Empowered palette, which I do have, and I don't know why I didn't put that together, but I do feel like there's like a good mix, like shades from Empowered and shades from Naughty Nude. Either way, I just like this palette as a standalone palette. I think the quality is great. I really like the cream shadows as liner. I don't have any issues with these on the eyes. They don't fade. They look beautiful every single time. So whether or not you're looking for a dupe to either of those palettes I mentioned, I just think that these are great options from the drugstore or that you can get at Ulta Beauty for $12. Like I said, they have 2 other color stories. So if you want more of a cool toned palette, they have one of those. And then what was the other one? I'm blanking. I think it had maybe like some pastel tones in it. I thought that one was kind of similar to Huda Beauty's Rose Quartz palette. Okay, another affordable option that I had to share with you is this one from ColourPop. I haven't purchased a lot of ColourPop palettes over the last few years. I do receive some PR from ColourPop, so occasionally they'll send me something and I'm like, that looks really interesting, so I'll try it out and review it on my channel. But that doesn't always happen with their palettes. When I got this one in the mail, I was like, I'm weirdly drawn to that. Like I know it is more of a neutral palette. I have colors like that in my collection, but I think the marketing behind this palette was a little bit different. Like everything seemed very luxe. And when I saw the initial video on Instagram, I thought it was for a high-end brand. So I think that kind of pulled me in a little bit. And I'm glad I ended up trying it because this quality is gorgeous. So first of all, this is the ColourPop Precious Metals palette. I feel like all of my palettes are so metallic today, so they're kind of hard to see on screen. This is one of their mega palettes, and typically their mega palettes are a little bit larger than I would usually go for when it comes to a palette. But I will say, as far as larger palettes go, like these are not uncomfortable to hold. They're not so big that they're hard to store because they're very thin and flat. I feel like I can fit them in my storage pretty easily. There are a lot of shadows in here, and I feel like maybe they could be condensed. So if you don't like mega palettes, that might be a con for you. But what I love about this one is they really did a good job at combining warm tones and cool tones. When I first glance at it, I'm like, oh, that's a very warm toned palette. But I think that's partly because of the packaging and the fact that these really stand out. But over here, you get some amazing cool tones. So if you like the idea of the Huda Beauty's Icy Nude, but you don't want to spend the money on it, or maybe it sells out because it is limited edition, you can get some very, very close colors within this palette, and then you get an entire second half of the palette as well. It feels like ColourPop's palette formula can be a little bit inconsistent. Like some palettes perform a little bit worse than others, some are a little bit better. This is one of the palettes that performs a little bit better, in my opinion. The metallic shadows are so rich and vibrant. The matte shadows are very smooth. There really isn't any patchiness within this palette. I've just been impressed by it and the fact that it kind of has like every single neutral color you need. I feel like when I look at this palette, I see shades similar to Huda Beauty's Icy Nude, Natasha Denona's I Need a Warm, and Natasha Denona's Golden, all within this one palette. So instead of spending like what, $210 on 3 palettes, you could spend $35 and get very, very similar looks every single time. Or of course, you could shop your stash and find shades that are very close too. But I just think this is a great option if you don't want high-end palettes and you want everything in one place, because the quality is definitely there. And I love the shades in here. I think they're beautiful, very wearable, but there are also tones if you kind of want to amp it up, create something a little bit more intense and vibrant or smoky. Let me share a couple of palettes that really surprised me this year. Honestly, I did not expect to like this one as much as I do. I know I say that every time I talk about it, but every single time I use it, I'm blown away by the quality and the final look. It is the Too Faced Appley in Love palette. This is such a stunning palette. I know you either love Too Faced palettes or you hate them, and these tin palettes kind of have like a little bit of a nostalgic feel. I loved the chocolate bar palette so, so much. And I feel like whenever they launch one, like that's what I think of. So in my mind, I'm like, that's an outdated formula. I'm not going to love it. I love this palette. This is probably the most colorful palette I tried in 2024. And for some people, you're like, that's not that colorful. And for other people, you're like, oh, that's a lot of color. But I especially love the berry tones in here. I've done a couple of videos using this, and I feel like every single time I use it, I can create a super colorful, really beautiful, cohesive look. You can pull in the pink tones, you can do like a pop of mint. Even the yellow and the gold in here are a little bit more colorful than you typically get in other palettes. You also get your staple neutrals, so you can create something a little bit more toned down and softer. But I think the more I use it, the more I'm really impressed by the quality. Overall, it's a pretty rich, pretty pigmented palette. And sometimes with those berry tones, you might need to take like an extra second or two to really blend them out. But in the end, it always comes together. It's very seamless, very, very beautiful. And I just kind of like the mix of tones in here. Again, it's definitely the most colorful palette I tried this year. So for me, it kind of pushes me out of my comfort zone a little bit. And if you're new to my channel, I used to do colorful looks all the time. Like I would pretty much exclusively wear color on the eyes from like, I don't even know, 2016 all the way up probably until 2020. I still love colorful eyeshadows so, so much. I just feel like it takes a lot of extra time typically. And it's not that colorful eyeshadows are always harder to blend. That can definitely be the case. But for me, like putting together a colorful eyeshadow look on the eyes doesn't come as easily as like a quick neutral look. So it's been really fun to play with color again. And I feel like this palette really pulled the creative side of me out again. It's just been fun to use. I was actually also really surprised by this launch from Too Faced. They did 2 different palettes. There's one in particular that's more of a standout to me, but they're both great options. These are the Born This Way mini eyeshadow palettes. So they did Cold Smolder Nudes, which is a cool toned 6-pan palette. I love this one. And then they also did Warm Ember Nudes. I also like this one too, but I do have the Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes palette, and the tones in there are very, very close to this one. So if you already have that palette as well, honestly, I would skip over this because they end up looking pretty much identical on the eyes, but the quality is definitely there. So if you like the idea of a smaller version of that, you won't be disappointed by it. That palette doesn't really have a lot of cool tones in it. So this one in particular has been more of a, I don't want to say it's like more unique to my collection. It's just not like a spot on dupe to the other one. So I've been using this one a lot, especially because cooler tones were trending a lot in the beginning of 2024. And I love a good cool toned palette. And I feel like for such a long time, brands weren't doing them. So this is the perfect way to add cooler tones to your collection without committing to a full size palette. These are, I think, around $29. So definitely less expensive than quite a few other options at Sephora. Obviously, you only get 6 shadows in here, but I feel like 6 shadows is quite a bit because you can do something lighter and softer or darker and smokier. And every single time I use this, I love it. I love the way it turns out. It's so beautiful. And I've gotten so many compliments whenever I've worn this in a video. So Too Faced really surprised me this year. I used to love their palettes back in the day, but it's been a little while since they were a brand that I've really looked to for eyeshadow palettes. And I wasn't really even doing that in 2024. But after trying both of these, like I could not put them down and I still use them all the time. Even though this was an earlier launch from the beginning of the year, I pull it out fairly often. Actually, there is one more palette that ended up surprising me. It's from Makeup by Mario. It's the Master Mattes The Neutrals palette. When I initially saw the photos of this, I was like, I'm not going to buy that one. I just don't really feel that inspired by it. It isn't quite as interesting as I was hoping. And I got it in the mail as PR. And when I opened it up, I was like, I don't know. It looks a little bit better in person than it does online. So I decided to try it out, and I'm actually glad I did. I do think this formula is a little bit better than the original. And I don't know if they updated the original one as well, but I tried the original one years ago when it first launched, and it was good. It was actually a staple in my collection for a little while. But over time, I found other formulas I liked a little bit better. Makeup by Mario's formula is probably more so on the dry side compared to a few other brands that have like a creamier formula. So it tends to be a little bit powdery, which doesn't necessarily make it a bad formula. It just hasn't always been my favorite. But I think the tones in here are actually what sets this palette apart. When you first look at it, you're like, yeah, that's a neutral palette with a pop of blue. But I think what Makeup by Mario does so well are undertones, just with a bunch of products, not just his eyeshadows, but sometimes when it comes to neutral palettes, the undertones aren't always the most flattering on the skin. But because he is a makeup artist, and I think that kind of tends to be the case with like makeup artist founded brands. They just have a lot of knowledge when it comes to color theory. And I'm sure that they're able to formulate shadows that, like to someone who's not a makeup artist, might look exactly the same as other brands. But when you actually apply them to the eyes, they create like that perfect look. I don't know if that's fully the case or not, but that's just kind of how I feel about this one. Like the browns in here end up looking so much more flattering on my eyes compared to browns in other palettes. And obviously that's going to depend on the way that you like your makeup to look, your skin tone, maybe how you apply the shadows, whether that's super heavily or a little bit lighter and softer. But I just ended up using this more than I really thought I would. And again, I won't say you have to run out and buy this one, but if you're someone who loves matte shadows and really only wears neutrals, this might be a palette that you would enjoy having in your collection. That being said, I did purchase a palette from Patrick Ta that I feel like has blown all the other neutral palettes out of the water for me. And this isn't something that actually launched in 2024. All of the other palettes are from 2024. So this is the only palette that launched earlier that I'm including in today's video because I think it launched right at the end of 2023. It's the Major Dimension 3. Again, when this one first launched, I was like, I'm not buying it. I don't need it. And then I think I ended up picking it up during the Sephora Spring Savings event. And I'm so glad I did because I think this is my most used palette of 2024. Which looking at it, you're probably like, it doesn't look that used. And I'm even kind of thinking the same thing, like a lot of the shadows still have that Patrick Ta imprint on them, but I swear I use this every single week. And it's not that I use it to create a full look every single time, but I might reach for like one shadow or a cream, a highlight tone, the black shadow for liner. It's just like a very complementary palette to every palette in my collection. It has the perfect mix of cool tones and warm tones, and I feel like a lot of palettes are missing just these basic colors. And again, I think Patrick Ta is a brand that really nails undertones tones when it comes to neutrals because these are just so flattering on the eyes. So anyway, I'm curious to see what brands have in store for 2025. What do you think are going to be the eyeshadow trends? I know eyeshadow as a whole is what many people consider outdated, but brands are still launching eyeshadow palettes. I don't know that we're going to see a shift back to colorful eyeshadow yet. I feel like sparkly shadows are definitely still what's going to be a big trend for a lot of brands, not just like sparkly palettes, but like sparkly singles, sparkly cream shadows, one and done type of shadows. But I still love a good palette. So I'll definitely be reviewing a couple as we head into the new year and we see some launches from different brands. I do have more end of the year wrap up videos coming your way soon. I'm also going to do an eyeshadow palette declutter. I need to film that. I really do need to clear out a good amount of palettes this year. I feel like a lot of palettes just kind of sat in my collection and I want to give them some new homes and maybe just curate my collection a lot. So that should be coming your way very, very soon. But thanks again for being here. I'll see you very soon with a new one. Bye.